Tonight, what happened at 4:23 a.m. Korean Standard Time in the waters off North Korea's eastern coastline represents the most dangerous escalation on the Korean peninsula since the armistice was signed in 1953. Good evening. Picture this moment unfolding in real time. A cascade of ballistic missiles, not one, not two, but 17 separate launches, streaking across the pre-dawn sky in a coordinated barrage that intelligence analysts are calling unprecedented in scope and sophistication. This isn't a test. This isn't posturing. This is North Korea demonstrating a launch capability that fundamentally alters the strategic calculus for every military planner from Seoul to Washington to Tokyo. We're talking about the kind of moment that gets studied in military academies for generations, the kind of inflection point where the entire security architecture of Northeast Asia shifts beneath our feet. Let me take you through what happened in those critical 37 minutes that have the entire Pacific Command scrambling tonight. Picture this at exactly 4:23 a.m. on December 9, 2025, surveillance satellites operated by the United States Space Force detected the first thermal signature. Location, approximately 8.7 kilometers inland from Wonsan on North Korea's eastern coast. Within 90 seconds, a second launch. Then a third. Intelligence analysts watching real-time feeds at Osan Air Base in South Korea immediately recognized this wasn't standard protocol. North Korea typically spaces missile tests hours or even days apart, but at 4:26 a.m., three more missiles. At 4:31 a.m., four simultaneous launches from different locations, Wonsan, Hamhung, and a previously unknown site near Tongchan that Western intelligence had not identified as operational. Imagine the scene in the command centers. At Indo-Pacific Command headquarters in Hawaii, it's 9:23 a.m. on December 8th, still the previous day across the international date line. Duty officers are suddenly staring at screens showing launch trajectories calculating in real time. Red lines arcing across digital maps of the Sea of Japan, each trajectory analysis taking between 4.2 and 6.7 seconds to compute. And before those calculations finish, more launches. By 4:37 a.m. Korean time, the count has reached 11 missiles. According to officials briefed on the satellite intelligence, these weren't the standard Hwasong series missiles North Korea has tested dozens of times. These were new variants, what Pentagon analysts are preliminarily designating as the Hwasong 21, featuring what appears to be maneuverable reentry vehicles. Think about that. We're talking about warheads that can adjust their trajectory during descent, making interception exponentially more difficult. The technical sophistication here represents a quantum leap beyond what intelligence assessments predicted North Korea could achieve before 2027. At 4:42 a.m., three more launches brought the total to 14. At 4:48 a.m., two additional missiles. And finally, at 4:59 a.m., exactly 36 minutes after the first detection, the 17th missile lifted off from a mobile launcher near Kyusung in North Korea's northwest region. 17 ballistic missiles in 36 minutes. To put that in perspective, during the height of tensions in 2017, North Korea's most aggressive single day involved three launches over a 14-hour period. Tonight, they've demonstrated they can launch nearly 6 times that number in less than an hour. Intelligence reporting suggests that at least 9 of these missiles achieved apogees, peak altitudes, exceeding 450 kilometers, with flight times ranging between 8.3 and 11.7 minutes before splashing down in the Sea of Japan. The impact zones formed a pattern approximately 380 kilometers east of the launch sites, well within Japan's exclusive economic zone but carefully calculated to avoid the 12 nautical mile territorial waters boundary. Every single impact site was positioned with geometric precision, almost as if North Korea was demonstrating they could hit exactly what they're aiming at. Think about that. North Korea just proved to the world that they possess not just nuclear weapons, not just ballistic missiles capable of reaching the continental United States, but the operational capacity to overwhelm missile defense systems through sheer volume. The THA-80 systems deployed in South Korea, the Aegis destroyers patrolling the Sea of Japan, the Patriot batteries protecting American bases, all of these were designed to intercept small numbers of missiles. But 17 launches in 36 minutes, that's salvo warfare doctrine. That's the strategy you use when you're not trying to send a message, you're trying to win. And what terrifies analysts tonight is the mathematical reality. Current US and allied missile defense systems in the region have an estimated intercept capacity of approximately 24 simultaneous targets under optimal conditions. North Korea just demonstrated they can launch 17 in half an hour. Now extrapolate that. If they can do 17 in 36 minutes from known sites, what could they achieve in an hour, in 3 hours, from mobile launchers intelligence hasn't even identified yet? Let me take you back to understand how we arrived at this crisis point. On October 27, 2025, 43 days ago, satellite imagery captured unusual activity at the Yongbyon Nuclear Scientific Research Center. Commercial satellite operators, the ones whose imagery gets analyzed by open-source intelligence researchers, noted that thermal signatures at the facility's radiochemical laboratory had intensified by approximately 34% compared to baseline levels from the previous 6 months. At the time, intelligence analysts assessed this as potentially indicating plutonium reprocessing activities, concerning but not unprecedented. North Korea had gone through similar cycles before. But here's what we didn't know then. According to sources with knowledge of classified intelligence reporting on October 31st, signals intelligence intercepts caught North Korean military communications using code words that CIA analysts had never encountered in 15 years of monitoring. The encryption protocols had changed. The communication networks had been reorganized. And most troubling, there were references to what translators interpreted as comprehensive readiness validation scheduled for early December. On November 8, Kim Jong-un convened what North Korean state media described as an enlarged meeting of the Central Military Commission. The photographs released by KCNA showed something unusual. Every military leader was present. General Ri Yong-gil, Chief of the General Staff, General Pak Jong-chon, Secretary of the Central Committee, Vice Marshal Kim Jong-gwan, Director of the General Political Bureau. This wasn't a routine meeting. Intelligence analysts noted that Kim was wearing his winter military uniform, significant because previous provocations have often followed these formal commission meetings where Kim appears in military dress rather than civilian attire. Then, on November 19th, commercial maritime tracking showed that Chinese cargo vessels that typically made weekly transits to Nampo and Wonsan ports had suddenly stopped arriving. Over a span of 72 hours, shipping traffic from China to North Korea decreased by 68%. Sources familiar with diplomatic communications indicate that Chinese foreign ministry officials privately expressed serious concern to their North Korean counterparts during a hastily arranged meeting in Dandong on November 22nd. Whatever Beijing learned in that meeting, it prompted them to quietly recall their ambassador from Pyongyang on November 26th, ostensibly for consultations, but in reality, according to officials briefed on the situation, because Chinese intelligence had assessed that North Korea was preparing for a major provocation, and China wanted to establish diplomatic distance. On December 1st, 8 days ago, the South Korean National Intelligence Service detected that North Korean military units along the DMZ had gone to a heightened readiness posture designated Level 2, one step below combat operations. Leaves were canceled. Artillery units were repositioned. According to intelligence reporting, at least 40 mobile missile launchers that had been stored in underground facilities were moved to field positions under cover of darkness. And here's the detail that should have triggered alarm bells. On December 5th, 4 days ago, North Korean state media suddenly went dark for a 36-hour period. No news broadcasts, no propaganda programming, just patriotic music and nature documentaries. Intelligence analysts describe this as message discipline, the kind of information blackout you impose when you're preparing for an operation, and you don't want any chance of operational details leaking through even your own controlled media. Think about that, every warning sign was there. The increased activity at Yongbyon, the reorganized military communications, the Chinese shipping withdrawal, the recall of diplomats, the media blackout, and yet the consensus assessment, the formal intelligence community judgment that circulated through the National Security Council as recently as December 7th, 48 hours ago, was that North Korea might conduct a single missile test before year's end as a year-end provocation. A single test. Maybe two. The intelligence community got the timing roughly right but catastrophically underestimated the scope. And that miscalculation reveals something deeply troubling about our intelligence capabilities. North Korea successfully concealed the scale of this operation despite surveillance satellites overhead every 90 minutes, despite signals intelligence monitoring every radio frequency, despite human intelligence networks in the region. They achieved operational surprise on a level we haven't seen from Pyongyang in decades. That's not just lucky for them. That's sophisticated operational security that suggests capabilities we need to fundamentally reassess. At 4:24 a.m. Korean Standard Time, 1 minute after the first launch detection, automated early warning systems triggered alerts that cascaded through the Indo-Pacific Command's integrated air defense network. At Yokota Air Base in Japan, duty officers at the 374th Airlift Wing Command Center received the alert at 4:24 a.m. At Asan Air Base in South Korea, the 51st Fighter Wing scrambled F-16 Fighting Falcons at 4:26 a.m., launching 4 aircraft in the first wave with full air-to-air loadouts. At exactly 4:29 a.m., Admiral Samuel Richardson, commander of United States Indo-Pacific Command, was awakened at his quarters in Hawaii with an emergency notification. By 4:31 a.m., he was on a secure video conference with Lieutenant General Paul Breyer, commander of U.S. Forces Japan, and General Paul LaCamera, commander of U.S. Forces Korea. According to officials with knowledge of that call, Admiral Richardson's first question was, "Do we have any indication this is anything other than a test?" The answer came from intelligence officers monitoring the launches in real time. "Sir, we're now tracking 8 separate launches. This exceeds any previous test pattern by an order of magnitude." At 4:35 a.m., General LaCamera ordered U.S. Forces Korea to DEFCON 3, Defense Readiness Condition 3, an increase in force readiness above normal levels. Think about that. The United States military doesn't go to DEFCON 3 for routine missile tests. The last time forces in Korea reached DEFCON 3 was during the height of tensions in 2017 when North Korea was conducting nuclear tests and threatening to strike Guam. Let me take you through what DEFCON 3 means operationally. At Camp Humphreys, the largest U.S. military base overseas, located approximately 64 kilometers south of Seoul, soldiers of the 8th Army were roused from barracks at 4:42 a.m. The 2nd Infantry Division began moving forces to pre-designated defensive positions. At Asan Air Base, maintenance crews began loading precision-guided munitions onto F-16s and F-35A Lightning IIs. At Kunsan Air Base on South Korea's western coast, the 8th Fighter Wing initiated elephant walk procedures, lining up combat aircraft on the runway in rapid launch configurations. According to intelligence analysts, at 4:47 a.m., South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol was briefed by his national security team in an emergency session at the Blue House in Seoul. Within minutes, the South Korean military raised its alert status to Watchkin 2, the second highest level in South Korea's 5-tier watch condition system. South Korean officials describe this as indicating vital threat conditions requiring enhanced surveillance and combat readiness. At 5:03 a.m., just 4 minutes after the 17th and final missile launch, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida Fumio convened the National Security Council at the Prime Minister's official residence in Tokyo. Present at that meeting, Minister of Defense Kihara Minoru, Minister of Foreign Affairs Kemikawa Yoko, Chief Cabinet Secretary Hayashi Yoshimasa, and Chairman of the Joint Staff General Yoshida Yoshihide. According to officials briefed on the discussion, Prime Minister Kishida immediately authorized the deployment of additional Aegis destroyers to patrol stations in the Sea of Japan and ordered the activation of Patriot PAC-3 missile defense systems at 17 locations across Japan's main islands. Think about that. In the span of 40 minutes, 3 allied nations simultaneously elevated their military postures to levels not seen outside of active conflict zones. That's not crisis management, that's crisis. And here's what makes this so dangerous. Military alert systems are designed with built-in de-escalation mechanisms. You're supposed to raise readiness, assess the threat, then stand down once the immediate danger passes. But North Korea has created a situation where standing down isn't an option. Every military planner from Seoul to Tokyo to Pearl Harbor is asking the same question right now. If North Korea can launch 17 missiles in 36 minutes today, what stops them from launching 30 tomorrow? Or 50? The mathematical logic of deterrence just fundamentally changed. Missile defense systems are now demonstrably inadequate for the threat. Which means military planners have to consider preemptive options, striking North Korean launch sites before they can get missiles in the air. And the moment South Korea or the United States starts seriously planning preemptive strikes, we're one miscalculation away from the worst war in 70 years. At 5:47 a.m. Korean time, the White House press secretary released a statement from President Anderson. The United States condemns in the strongest possible terms North Korea's reckless ballistic missile launches. These actions represent a clear violation of multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions and pose an unacceptable threat to regional peace and stability. I have directed Secretary of Defense Morrison and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Hartley to ensure all U.S. forces in the Indo-Pacific region maintain maximum readiness. We stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies South Korea and Japan, and we will take all necessary measures to defend American forces, our allies, and our interests. Let me show you what all necessary measures means in practical terms. According to intelligence reporting by 6:15 a.m. Korean time, the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group, which had been conducting routine operations approximately 850 kilometers southeast of Okinawa, received orders to proceed at maximum speed toward the Korean peninsula. The strike group includes the carrier USS Ronald Reagan with approximately 5,000 personnel and an air wing of 65 aircraft, the guided missile cruiser USS Lake Champlain, and 4 guided missile destroyers: USS Fitzgerald, USS Barry, USS Wayne E. Mayer, and USS Dewey. Combined, these vessels carry approximately 450 Tomahawk cruise missiles, each capable of striking targets up to 1,600 kilometers away with precision measured in meters. At 6:33 a.m., Strategic Command at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska elevated the readiness status of the 20th Air Force, the command responsible for the United States Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Force. According to officials familiar with the order, this involved increasing the alert posture of Minuteman III ICBMs at 3 bases: Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, and F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. When Strategic Command elevates ICBM readiness, it means launch crews are at their consoles, authentication codes are verified, and missiles can be launched within minutes of receiving authorized orders. Think about that. North Korea launched 17 missiles at 4:23 a.m. in Korea. By 6:33 a.m., just over 2 hours later, the United States had positioned nuclear-capable forces in advanced states of readiness across 2 oceans and 3 continents. That's the hair-trigger world we're living in tonight. Think about that. We're now in a situation where both sides have military forces postured for immediate action, operating on compressed decision timelines with limited communication channels and decades of mutual mistrust. Military historians call this a reciprocal fear of surprise attack, the condition where each side, fearing the other might strike first, has incentives to preempt. It's the same dynamic that nearly triggered nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. And here's what makes tonight even more dangerous than October 1962. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev had multiple communication channels, diplomatic backchannels, the famous hotline, personal correspondence. Tonight, the United States and North Korea have virtually no direct communication infrastructure. The last high-level contact was a failed summit in Hanoi in 2019, 6 years ago. There's no hotline to Pyongyang. No established protocol for de-escalation. No trusted intermediaries. China traditionally played that role, but their shipping withdrawal in November and their ambassador recall suggest Beijing has limited influence right now. So we have a crisis with Cold War-level stakes, but without Cold War-level communication infrastructure. That's not just dangerous, that's catastrophic potential. Let me take you to where this situation stands at this moment. As of 8:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 8, 2025, which is 10:15 a.m. December 9th in Korea, here's what we're seeing unfold across multiple theaters. In North Korea, state media has released footage showing Kim Jong-un personally observing what they describe as combined strike drill exercises. The footage, broadcast on Korean Central Television at 7:30 a.m. local time, shows Kim at what analysts believe is the General Command Center in Pyongyang, surrounded by senior military officials, watching large screens displaying missile launches. In a statement released through KCNA, the Korean Central News Agency, Kim is quoted saying, "The nuclear-armed forces of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea demonstrated the invincible might that can mercilessly punish anyone who dares to threaten our sovereignty. Let those who scheme against us witness the consequences of their hostility." According to officials briefed on intelligence assessments, that statement is significant for what it includes and what it omits. It includes explicit references to nuclear-armed forces, unusual language even for North Korea, which typically maintains some ambiguity about the operational status of its nuclear arsenal, but it omits any mention of specific targets or specific adversaries. Intelligence analysts interpret this as North Korea leaving itself diplomatic space. They've demonstrated capability without explicitly threatening imminent attack. In South Korea, President Yoon convened an emergency session of the National Assembly at 9:30 a.m. In remarks to assembled lawmakers, President Yoon stated, "The Republic of Korea will not tolerate threats to our people's safety. I have authorized the Ministry of National Defense to coordinate with our American allies on comprehensive response options. We are prepared to defend our homeland with every capability at our disposal." According to sources familiar with the National Assembly session, opposition lawmakers pressed Yoon on whether every capability included South Korea's own conventional strike capabilities, specifically the Hyunmoo-2 and Hyunmoo-3 cruise missiles capable of striking targets throughout North Korea. President Yoon declined to rule out any options. In Japan, Chief Cabinet Secretary Hayashi held a press conference at 11:00 a.m., stating that 17 North Korean missiles entered Japan's exclusive economic zone, with impact sites ranging from 280 to 420 kilometers west of Japan's western coastline. This represents an unprecedented provocation, Hayashi stated, and Japan demands the strongest possible international response. According to officials, Japan has requested an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council to address the launches, a session now scheduled for 3:00 p.m. Eastern Time today in New York. Let me show you the choice Kim Jong-un faces right now, and why every option leads to outcomes he cannot accept. Option 1, claim this was purely a military exercise, a defensive drill with no offensive intent, and signal willingness to return to negotiations. Here's the problem: that makes Kim look weak domestically. He's built his entire political legitimacy on the principle of strength against external threats, particularly the United States. If he launches 17 missiles and then immediately signals diplomatic openness, it undermines the fundamental narrative he's constructed for his population. According to defectors familiar with North Korean elite politics, any perception that Kim backed down from confrontation with the United States could embolden internal rivals within the Korean Workers' Party and the military leadership. In a regime that rules through fear and demonstrations of strength, looking weak is existentially dangerous for the leader. Option 2, maintain current military posture, neither escalating nor de-escalating, and wait for international pressure to force the United States and South Korea to make concessions. The problem here is time works against North Korea. Every day that passes with U.S. forces at elevated readiness increases pressure on Washington to do something. Congressional hawks are already calling for additional sanctions, for secondary sanctions against Chinese entities still trading with North Korea, for increased military exercises on the peninsula. Intelligence reporting suggests that sustaining 17 mobile missile launchers in field positions becomes logistically challenging after approximately 10 days. Fuel requirements, crew fatigue, maintaining concealment from satellite surveillance. So if North Korea maintains current posture, they're burning resources and inviting pressure while their operational position degrades. Option 3, escalate further, conduct a nuclear test, launch missiles over Japan rather than into the sea, or demonstrate some other capability to prove they cannot be intimidated. This is where it gets catastrophic. According to military officials briefed on operational plans, if North Korea launches a missile over Japan's main islands, not just toward the sea but actually overflying populated areas, Japan would face enormous domestic pressure to respond kinetically. We're talking about a scenario where Japanese destroyers might attempt to intercept the missile, which could lead to shooting. And the moment shooting starts, the crisis shifts from dangerous posturing to actual combat. Moreover, if North Korea conducts another nuclear test, what would be their seventh overall and first since 2017? Intelligence analysts assess that South Korea might reconsider its current policy against developing its own nuclear weapons. You'd be looking at potential nuclear proliferation in Northeast Asia on a timeline measured in months, not years. Think about that. Every option leads to an outcome Kim Jong-un cannot accept. Either he looks weak, or he burns resources while pressure increases, or he escalates to a point where military conflict becomes likely. This is what strategic analysts call a zugzwang, a position where any move worsens your situation. And when leaders find themselves in zugzwang positions, when they feel cornered with no good options, that's when they start taking desperate gambles. That's when miscalculation becomes catastrophe. Think about that. We need to understand what makes this fundamentally different from previous North Korean provocations. In 2006, when North Korea conducted its first nuclear test, the international community imposed sanctions. In 2017, when North Korea tested ICBMs capable of reaching the United States, sanctions were intensified. Each time the pattern was the same: provocation, condemnation, sanctions, period of relative quiet, repeat. But sanctions have reached the point of diminishing returns. North Korea has been under comprehensive UN Security Council sanctions since 2006, 19 years of economic isolation. Their economy has adapted. They've developed smuggling networks, cryptocurrency schemes, cyber theft operations that generate an estimated $650 million annually. They've survived sanctions that would collapse most governments. So the old playbook, condemn, sanction, wait for compliance, isn't viable anymore, which means we're in uncharted territory. If sanctions don't work, what does? Military action risks catastrophic war. Acceptance of North Korea as a nuclear-armed state rewards provocation and encourages proliferation. Engagement and negotiation have failed repeatedly. So what's the answer? And here's the terrifying reality: nobody has a good answer. Not in Washington, not in Seoul, not in Tokyo, not in Beijing. We're facing a problem without a clear solution, with military forces on high alert, operating on compressed timelines in a region where any shooting could escalate to conflict involving nuclear weapons. That's not a crisis, that's a civilizational threat. Let me take you through the historical context that explains why this moment matters far beyond just Northeast Asia. The Korean Armistice Agreement was signed on July 27, 1953, 72 years ago. Not a peace treaty, an armistice, a ceasefire. For 7 decades, the fundamental legal status of the Korean Peninsula has been paused war. During those 72 years, the United States maintained its alliance with South Korea under the 1953 Mutual Defense Treaty, committing American forces to defend the South in perpetuity. That alliance structure became a cornerstone of the broader U.S. security architecture across Asia. Treaties with Japan, the Philippines, Thailand, Australia, all designed to contain communist expansion during the Cold War and later to manage rising powers in a multipolar world. But here's what's changed. North Korea's nuclear weapons program has fundamentally altered the strategic calculus that underpinned that alliance system. When North Korea was a poor, isolated country with conventional weapons, the U.S. security guarantee to South Korea was credible because the costs of defending Seoul were acceptable. American casualties in a Second Korean War would be horrific. Analysts estimate potentially hundreds of thousands, but the conflict would be contained on the peninsula. Now consider the situation tonight. North Korea possesses an estimated 50 to 60 nuclear warheads, according to intelligence assessments. They've demonstrated ICBM capabilities that can reach the continental United States, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. And tonight, they demonstrated the ability to launch 17 ballistic missiles in 36 minutes, overwhelming regional missile defenses. Here's the strategic question that terrifies planners. Would the United States risk Los Angeles to defend Seoul? According to officials involved in strategic planning, that question, sometimes called the decoupling problem, has dominated classified war games and strategic assessments for the past 5 years. If North Korea launches a major conventional assault on South Korea, and the United States responds with overwhelming force to defend its ally, North Korea now has the capability to strike American cities with nuclear weapons. Would any American president accept the destruction of an American city to defend a foreign capital? And if the answer is anything less than an absolute yes, then the credibility of extended deterrence, the U.S. nuclear umbrella that has protected allies for 70 years, is fundamentally undermined. Think about that. This isn't just about Korea. This is about whether the entire post-World War II alliance system that has prevented great power conflict for 80 years remains viable in an era where regional powers possess weapons of mass destruction. If South Korea concludes that the U.S. security guarantee isn't credible, that America won't risk Los Angeles for Seoul, then South Korea might pursue its own nuclear weapons. And if South Korea goes nuclear, Japan will face enormous pressure to follow. According to non-proliferation experts, Japan could develop nuclear weapons within 6 months if the political decision was made. They have the plutonium, the delivery systems, the technical expertise. And if Japan goes nuclear, then what about Taiwan? What about Australia? We're looking at the potential collapse of the entire non-proliferation regime that has limited the spread of nuclear weapons for 50 years. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, signed in 1968, worked because non-nuclear states accepted security guarantees from nuclear-armed great powers. But if those guarantees lose credibility, the entire architecture collapses. We could be looking at a world with 20, 30, 40 nuclear-armed states within a generation. That's not hyperbole. That's the assessment of non-proliferation experts who have studied cascade proliferation scenarios. At 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time, 3:45 a.m. December 9th in Korea, the United States Pacific Air Forces launched B-1B Lancer strategic bombers from Andersen Air Force Base in Guam. According to officials familiar with the mission, 4 B-1B bombers conducted what the Air Force describes as precision strike drills over the Korean peninsula in coordination with South Korean F-15K fighters and U.S. F-35As. The B-1B Lancer, while no longer configured to carry nuclear weapons, is capable of delivering 75,000 pounds of conventional precision-guided munitions with accuracy measured in meters. The message, according to military officials, is clear. The United States can strike North Korean targets with overwhelming force if necessary. At 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Secretary of Defense William Morrison held a press briefing at the Pentagon. Morrison stated, "The United States military maintains complete readiness to defend the homeland, our forces deployed abroad, and our allies. What North Korea demonstrated today was reckless and destabilizing. What we will demonstrate in the coming days is resolve and capability. When asked by reporters whether military options were under consideration, Morrison responded, "The president reviews the full range of options in any crisis. I will say clearly, we will not allow North Korea's actions to threaten American security or that of our allies." According to sources with knowledge of classified discussions, that language, full range of options, is deliberate. In diplomatic and military terminology, it's a signal that everything is on the table, including kinetic options, strikes against North Korean missile sites, leadership targets, nuclear facilities. Intelligence analysts note that such language is typically reserved for the most serious crises, when deterrence through diplomatic messaging alone is assessed as insufficient. Here's what makes the next 72 hours so dangerous. According to officials briefed on the situation, North Korea's missile launches created what strategists call a window of vulnerability. Right now, US and South Korean intelligence has identified the approximate locations of at least 11 mobile missile launchers that participated in this morning's barrage. Those launchers are vulnerable to strike for a limited time, perhaps 48 to 72 hours, before they can be moved to new concealed positions or returned to underground storage facilities where they become effectively invulnerable to conventional weapons. Military planners are acutely aware that there's a narrow time window where preemptive strikes could significantly degrade North Korea's mobile missile capability. But here's the trap. The moment the United States or South Korea starts preparing such strikes, moving additional strike aircraft into position, repositioning naval assets, uploading specific target packages, North Korean intelligence will detect those preparations. And North Korea, facing the possibility of an imminent attack on their nuclear forces, might calculate that they need to use it or lose it, launch a major strike before their capabilities are destroyed. This is the destabilizing logic of first strike instability. When both sides have incentives to strike first, when the side that shoots first gains significant advantages, crises become extraordinarily dangerous. According to military historians, this is the exact dynamic that nearly triggered nuclear war during the 1983 Able-Archer crisis, when Soviet leadership believed NATO exercises were cover for an actual attack and came close to launching preemptive strikes. Intelligence analysts describe the next 72 hours as a decision crucible. Kim Jong-un must decide whether to de-escalate, maintain current posture, or escalate further. US and South Korean leadership must decide whether to accept North Korea's demonstration of capability, pursue additional sanctions and diplomatic pressure, or consider military options. And because both sides are making decisions in compressed timeframes, with incomplete information under enormous pressure, the probability of miscalculation spikes dramatically. Let me show you what military planners are watching with particular concern over the next 3 days. According to intelligence reporting, North Korea typically conducts major military provocations in clusters. In 2017, the pattern was nuclear test in September, followed by 3 ballistic missile tests over the subsequent 6 weeks. In 2022, North Korea conducted 8 separate missile tests in a single month. If history is any guide, tonight's 17-missile barrage might not be the end of this crisis. It might be the opening move. Think about that. What if this is only the beginning? What if North Korea's strategic calculus is to conduct a sustained campaign of launches, demonstrating not just capability but operational sustainability, to force the world to accept them as a nuclear-armed state? Intelligence analysts wargaming this scenario assess that if North Korea launches another comparable barrage within the next week, international pressure for military response will become overwhelming. You'd have South Korean public opinion demanding action. You'd have Japanese officials questioning whether diplomacy has any remaining utility. You'd have congressional Republicans and Democrats in Washington united in calling for strikes. And you'd have military commanders presenting options that range from limited strikes against specific missile sites to comprehensive campaigns against North Korea's entire nuclear infrastructure. Operations that could involve hundreds of aircraft, thousands of strikes, and casualties measured in the hundreds of thousands once North Korea's inevitable retaliation is factored in. We're looking at potential war on a scale not seen since 1953, in the most heavily militarized region on Earth, involving nuclear-armed states, with American forces directly in the crossfire and American cities potentially within range of North Korean ICBMs. That's not worst-case speculation. That's the scenario military planners are actively preparing for right now. According to intelligence analysts, China's response over the next 72 hours will be decisive. Beijing has consistently opposed North Korean nuclear weapons development while simultaneously blocking UN Security Council measures that might destabilize the North Korean regime. but tonight's launches put China in an impossible position. If Beijing continues protecting North Korea from international consequences, they own responsibility for whatever comes next. If Beijing abandons North Korea, cutting off the oil supplies and trade that keep the regime functioning, they risk regime collapse on their border, potential refugee flows of millions, and the possibility of a unified Korea allied with the United States right across the Yalu River. Sources familiar with diplomatic communications indicate that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi held urgent consultations with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov at 11:00 a.m. Beijing time. According to officials briefed on the call, China and Russia are coordinating their positions ahead of the emergency UN Security Council session. Both nations are expected to block any new sanctions while calling for restraint from all parties. But intelligence analysts note that Chinese state media coverage of North Korea's launches has been notably critical, a signal that Beijing's patience may finally be exhausted. Think about that. We're facing a crisis where every major power has conflicting interests and limited influence. The United States wants North Korean denuclearization, but has no pathway to achieve it without catastrophic war. South Korea and Japan want security, but are increasingly doubting whether U.S. guarantees are credible against a nuclear-armed North Korea. China wants stability on the Korean peninsula, but has limited leverage over Kim Jong-un and fears any intervention might trigger regime collapse. Russia sees North Korea as a useful irritant to the United States, but has no interest in actual war that might escalate beyond control. North Korea wants security guarantees and economic relief, but refuses to surrender the nuclear weapons that provide their only leverage. There's no overlap in interests. No common ground for negotiation, no trusted mediator, no clear off-ramp. Just competing powers with nuclear weapons, conventional forces on high alert, and the very real possibility that someone somewhere miscalculates in the next 72 hours and triggers a conflict that kills millions. Let me bring this to what it means for anyone watching tonight. Whether you're in Seoul or Tokyo or Los Angeles or anywhere else in this increasingly interconnected world. For 72 years, we've maintained an uneasy peace on the Korean peninsula through deterrence, the promise that aggression would be met with overwhelming response. That deterrence worked because the costs of war were clear to both sides. North Korea couldn't win a war against the combined forces of South Korea and the United States, and the United States could defend South Korea without risking American cities. Tonight, we're living in a fundamentally different reality. North Korea has nuclear weapons, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and the demonstrated ability to overwhelm regional missile defenses. The old deterrence calculus, where everyone understood the rules and the consequences, has broken down. We're improvising now, making decisions in real time without clear precedents or proven strategies. What makes this terrifying isn't just the immediate crisis. The missiles launched this morning, the forces on alert, the 72-hour decision window. What's terrifying is that we're facing the future that non-proliferation experts have warned about for decades. A world where regional powers possess weapons of mass destruction, where deterrence becomes unstable, where crises escalate faster than diplomacy can resolve them, and where the risk of civilization ending conflict is no longer a Cold War memory but a present reality. Think about that. And yet, here's what should give us both fear and hope. Fear because 17 missiles launched in 36 minutes proved that North Korea isn't bluffing about their capabilities. Fear because military forces across three nations are at readiness levels that are one miscalculation away from shooting. Fear because the next 72 hours involve decisions that could determine whether millions live or die. Fear because the diplomatic tools that work to manage previous crises, sanctions, negotiations, deterrence, are proving inadequate for this moment. But hope because in every previous crisis on the Korean peninsula over 72 years, cooler heads ultimately prevailed. Hope because despite the provocations and the rhetoric and the weapons demonstrations, every leader involved tonight understands the catastrophic consequences of war. Hope because even now, despite the absence of formal communication channels between Washington and Pyongyang, there are still intermediaries. NGOs, academic channels, intelligence-backed channels where messages can be passed and intentions can be clarified. Hope because humanity has faced nuclear crises before: Cuba in 1962, Able Archer in 1983, the Taiwan Strait in 1996, and we survived because leaders chose to step back from the brink. What happens in the next 72 hours will define Northeast Asian security for a generation. It will test alliances that have endured since World War II. It will determine whether the non-proliferation regime that has constrained nuclear weapons for 50 years survives or collapses. And it will reveal whether humanity, in this moment of extraordinary danger, can summon the wisdom to choose peace over the catastrophic certainty of war. The missiles are quiet now. The launches ended at 4:59 a.m. Korean time, but the crisis is just beginning. And what happens next depends on choices that leaders are making at this very moment in Pyongyang, Washington, Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing, choices that will echo through history and shape the world our children inherit. I'm Rachel Maddow. Thank you for being here. Stay informed and good night.